Hi everyone, I'm Barb Roberts, your host for Park Bench, and I am here today with Megan McBroom, who represents Women First, Women and Children 1st, correct?
Yes.
And this is an organization that handles things that nobody likes to talk about, and that's domestic violence. But thank goodness for them because they make such a difference in our community. So Megan, tell us a little bit about what Women and Children First does.
Yeah, so we are a dual shelter. So we're domestic violence, but we're also servicing guests that have dealt with sexual assault as well. And we have been in the business for well over 40 years. So we got our start in 1976 by a group of women in the area in Little Rock that said, hey, we have a problem with domestic violence. We need to do something about that. So we're offering not only emergency shelter, but we're offering other services like support groups. Do we need to handle children's education, court advocacy, legal aid? All of that happens in our shelter.
Which is fabulous because I would imagine a lot of women in those situations don't really even know the first step
Absolutely.
to take,
Absolutely.
let alone having the support people around them in their environment to help them get that.
Yes, absolutely.
So that's amazing. And something else that surprised me was, tell us a little bit about the shelter itself.
Yeah.
Because you're almost at capacity, right?
We are. So we are currently a 54-bed shelter, which most people think, wow, that's a lot of people, and it is. But when we, spanned 10 years ago, we had an even smaller shelter. We outgrew them. We moved to our new shelter. We're 54 beds. So we are currently always at capacity for the majority of the time. So last year alone, there were only 4 nights where we had any room for anyone whatsoever. All of those nights, there was only 1 bed available. So when we have a limited amount of space, a limited amount of beds, we have a problem providing those resources that we need. So our short-term goal is to get into a new shelter where we can have at least 100 beds to make sure we're servicing our community how we should.
That's amazing. And is that something that's currently in the planning stages?
Yes, so we're trying. So we are working with our community partners, any sort of legislation that we have to make sure that we can move to a new space, build, and even provide some other kind of outreach, community service type of things that we haven't been able to do before.
Because you're 100% nonprofit,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
You get all of your money through private donations and grants?
Yes, absolutely.
Like
So 100% of our funding is either coming from, our gracious donors, or it's coming from grant funding in our community or nationwide. So something that we always try to touch on, we know how much the government shutdown impacted everyone. Same thing for us in the nonprofit world. So if we have a shutdown, that means we have limited resources to provide our guests. And that's a problem for us because domestic violence doesn't stop.
And it's not just a shelter. You have all kinds of training available to them too, right? Programs?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so tell us a little bit about that.
So we have, within the shelter, we have your basic services, which we think are important. So that's going to be your support groups. That's going to be making sure they can get documentation, anything that they need. But that's also going to span out to, do you need help finding a job? We have a lot of great sister nonprofits in the area that help us with resources we can't do in-house. Do you need to have transitional housing? Have you completed our program? It's time for independent living. Let's move on to that. We do that in shelter. So any sort of type of resource that they need to move forward, all of that is done in-house.
What about like counseling?
Yes. So our support groups are big. That's where the majority of our counseling comes from because we do them multiple times a week as well as individual counseling. But our staff is trained at any given time if they need a counseling session. But it's not just in shelter. So say we have someone who's completed our program, we continue an outreach program with them.
That's good.
So they
they're
can
not
come.
just cut off.
No, absolutely. So they can come back into the shelter at any time and work with their advocate or counseling in our shelter and make sure that we're continuing that program with them.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
It really is. So what would you say your biggest challenge right now is?
Sure. So our biggest challenge, I think 100% of the time, is getting our mission out there. Reason being, no one wants to talk about domestic violence.
Right. It's uncomfortable.
It's gritty.
You don't want to believe that it exists.
Absolutely.
But it does.
Absolutely.
It does.
So it's sometimes hard for us to get indoors and talk about what we do day in and day out. It's much easier. All causes are important. We know
Right.
that. But it is much easier to go out and talk about something that maybe isn't as aggressive and violent and gritty. And so our biggest challenge is spreading our mission and convincing people to do so. 100% hands down.
Yeah, I can see that. So hopefully this will help a little bit.
Yeah.
And then what would you say your biggest success since you've been with them has been?
Yeah. So absolutely, and I've mentioned this before, it's, we have individual successes all the time. Maybe you form a new partnership with someone that's great in the community. Maybe they bring something to the table to the shelter we didn't have before. But our biggest success at any given time is seeing a woman break the cycle of violence. And we don't just, our shelter isn't just for women and children. We also cater to men as well. They are equally as affected by domestic violence. But when you see a man or a woman, especially women, transition out of our house, they go into independent living, they have broken the cycle of violence and continue to do so, that's why we're in this business. That's why we fight for our mission. So to see that, that's what makes it worthwhile for us.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's a great organization. And so I'll have all of Megan's information at the bottom. Now, do you have volunteer programs? Are you always looking for volunteers?
Always looking for volunteers.
Okay, so I'll have her contact information at the bottom of the screen, and you can contact her if you'd like more information on volunteering or if you'd like more information about donating. Thank you again, and thank you very much, Megan.
Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.